A headscarf. More than 520 protesters have been killed in Iran.
I'm Natasha Fateh. Welcome to our CBC News special presentation on the Iran protests.
Thousands of demonstrators packed downtown LA to protest against Iran on the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution.
In 3 months since the death of Mahsa Amini at Iran's Moral police custody.
Protests continue to rage in Iran.
According to reports, over 450 protesters, including 63 children, have died so far.
Protests continue to rage across Iran.
What does support for all women look like? This might sound like a funny question, however, it's an important one. As I'm sure many of you watching this video have heard, there have been ongoing protests in Iran regarding the rights of women to basic human rights, such as schooling, healthcare, and the choice of whether or not to veil. However, I'm going to assume many of you have not heard about something very similar happening in another part of the world. That, of course, is the ban on veiling that has been long ongoing to this day in France and much of Europe. Within this presentation, I'm going to present the long history of this topic, along with the laws that made it all legal and the effects that it has on women in modern times, and how it is deeply rooted in fear and racism against Islamic cultures and religions. First, before even going into the timeline of the laws that made such a ban legal, we need to understand the deep and rich history between France and Islamic cultures. This complex history first takes place in 1831 when France's armies invaded Algeria. This invasion was followed by a period of violent repression, massacres, and land grabs. The troops also held Tunisia in 1881 and Morocco in 1912. They forcefully took power for the majority Muslim populations. Large parts of Muslim West Africa also came under their rule in the 19th century. France, a historically Catholic country, cast the Muslim people under its power as racially and socially inferior and undeveloped as a group. The French used the veiling of Muslim women, children marriages, and gender seclusion as a way to demonstrate to the French public the necessity of invasion within their religion and the country. It is very publicly talked about how the French viewed this as rescuing Muslim women and that their actions were improving the lives of the now colonized people. However, this claim, of course, was used to hide the constant violence of the war. It is estimated that the French killed 825,000 indigenous people during the 40-year pacification of Algeria, not to mention the decades of poverty, wealth extraction, massacre, and war crimes that took place during these 40 years. Even French feminists of the 20s used these actions of the French saving these women to their own means, arguing their own political influence and autonomy. Of course, it is very important to know that Muslim women were very rarely invited to any of these movements or discussions held by the French women. There are tons of more examples of the history of French and Muslim communities, including World War II and the Algeria War of Independence. But if I was to cover all of this, I'd be here all day. I just hope the takeaway here is that France have been using Muslim women for hundreds of years to justify their own killing, wars, and colonizations with the twisted title of saving them. Once again, there's many different laws that were into place over the last few decades. However, I'll be covering the 12 key dates that bring us to present time, starting in 2003 Germany. All the information of these dates and laws put in place was provided by the Guardian webpage and news source. September 24th, 2003. Germany's Federal Constitutional Court rules in favor of an Afghan-born teacher who wants to wear an Islamic scarf to school, but it says states can change their laws locally if they want to. Half of Germany's regions go on to ban teachers from wearing headscarves. February 3rd, 2004. France's National Assembly begins a debate to ban religious symbols, including Muslim headscarves, Jewish skull caps, and large Christian crosses from schools. March 31st, 2010. A key community in Belgium votes to implement the first European ban against the wearing of burqa and ruban in public. Think of these as full-body covered veiling. I am proud that Belgium would be the first country in Europe which dares to legislate on such a sensitive matter, says the center-right MP Denis Ducam. But it is the French government that imposes the first ban. A law banning full-face veil did not come into effect in Belgium until July 2011, 3 months after the French's ban. April 11, 2011, under a decree by the France's Prime Minister Francois Fillon, women are banned from wearing the burqa and ruban in any public place. Under the first ban of its kind in Europe, face veils are outlawed virtually everywhere outside of a woman's home, except when worshiping in a religious place or traveling as a passenger in a car. July 1, 2014, the European Court of Human Rights upheld French's ban. The judge says preservation of a certain idea of living together is the legitimate aim of the French authorities. May 22, 2015, the Dutch cabinet approves a partial ban on face covering Islamic veiling on public transport and in public areas. The ban does not apply to wearing the burqa or the ruban on the street, except when there are security reasons. January 8, 2016, the former UK Prime Minister David Cameron says that he will back institutions with sensible rules over Muslims wearing full face veiling, but rules out a full public ban. In our country, people should be free to wear what they'd like, Cameron says, but adds, when you are coming into context with either different institutions or, for instance, you are in court or someone needs to see your face at the border, then I would always back the authorities or institutions that have put in place proper and sensible rules. August 18, 2016, France's Prime Minister Manuel Valls defends bans on body covering burkini swimwear designed for Muslim women after mayor imposes several bans on the clothing in several seaside towns. December 6, 2016, the German chancellor endorses a partial ban on the burqa and the ruban. The full face veiling is inappropriate and should be banned whenever is legally possible, she argues. January 30, 2017, Australia's ruling court agrees to prohibit full-face veiling such as the burqa and the ruban in court and in schools. It also pledges to investigate banning headscarves for women employed in public services, in a move designed to hold the ruling court together by pleasing the Anti-Immigration Freedom Party. March 14, 2007, in its first decision on the headscarf issue, the European Court of Justice rules that employers can bar staff from wearing visible religious symbols, but the court also rules that customers cannot simply demand that workers remove headscarves if the company has no policy barring religious symbols. May 31, 2018, the Danish parliament votes to ban garments that cover the face, including Islamic veils such as the niqab or the ruba. The bill was presented by the ruling Central Right Court. Of course, there is more that goes into all of this, but as I stated earlier, I'd be here all day if I wanted to go into every detail, but now you know the important parts. Of course, there's information to cover here regarding COVID, but the only thing you should know regarding that is that there was a face mask requirement, however, not many drew any parallel between the two laws. Now that you know the history, the question remains of asking how this affects real living women and young girls living in France today. There's the question of religious fairness here. It seems read almost, as it is, targeted. These laws can affect women of the Jewish and Christian faiths, but it seems as if the French government simply skipped past those parts. Now, of course, I need to talk about this in all fairness of real-life results, and that can be seen quite easily in the numbers. I want to talk about two different groups. Those born before 1986 and thus completed secondary school before the laws were enacted, and those born in 1986 and later on, and thus were in secondary school during the effects of the ban. This information is found by using France's labor marketing survey and comparing Muslim women to their non-Muslim peers who had the same amount of schooling. On average, Muslim women in France have always been worse off than their non-Muslim peers. Now, if this ban had no effect, the difference in outcome between Muslim and non-Muslim women would have remained the same before 1986 and in the years that followed. Of course, this is not the case, as I'm sure many of you assumed. The law did in fact widen the gap between Muslim and non-Muslim women, mainly the gap in secondary school attendance. The number of Muslim women not attending secondary school was doubled when compared to non-Muslim women. The rate of dropping out of secondary school increased by 6% when compared to other women in the year the ban went into place. After the ban, the employment gap between the two women also widened by a third, while the gap in labor force participation widened by a half. Muslim women were less independent after the ban. On average, they had more children and are more likely to live with their parents. While the ban claimed to be helping these women, it seemed to be having the opposite effect. Now, what is the explanation for these effects? Well, first off, many young Muslim perception on discrimination was huge after these laws went into place. and many young Muslim girls were subject to bullying and different treatment in school from both their peers and their teachers. Something else of note is the importance of the fact that young Muslim women can no longer identify as both a member of their religious community with their headscarves while also identifying with their country of birth, France. Now these two identities were unable to be conjoined. Now looking at the men's numbers, there was a small dip in school attendance before going back to normal after about 3 years, but nothing of note as we see in the women's numbers. Now, how does the Western world view all of this? Well, in truth, we don't really view it at all. There is very little media coverage regarding this topic. As I said before, I'm sure many of you had seen similar news coverage to what I showed at the start of this presentation. It's very aligned with our own Western ideals, after all. The idea of giving women freedom, the freedom to remove the veils that their religion traps them under, is something that appeals to us, with our own ideals of Islamic religion and their cult. As can be seen due to the vast amount of news coverage, many Americans support the women of Islam protesting for their right to unveil. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should be supporting these women, but we need to make sure that this is double-sided. In both of these scenarios, women are being stripped from their right to choose. Yet, why do we care so much more about one than the other? I'm going to end this off by saying that we need to support all women, not just the ones that align with their own views. The laws in France are slowly outreaching to other European countries, and it's scary to think, what's next? What right and freedom will be taken from women next, and who knows, it might be a lot closer to home this time around. Now that you know the history, laws, and effects that these bans have brought about on women in France, I hope what you take away from this presentation is the importance of offering our support to all communities and women across the world, not just the ones that align with us. Women of Muslim faiths are being discriminated against all over the world and have been for quite some time. It's up to us, as women ourselves and the men who wish to support us, to make the change, to support all women, not just some of them.